Okay, so I'm gonna get you guys to sort of look through those first 50 pages of Life of Pi and either highlight or underline or make a list of all the kind of life lessons related to animals that Pi gains as a young man. So there's a whole kind of list or knowledge about animal behavior that he learns in his childhood that becomes sort of relevant as the story goes on. So um, I'll give you a little indication of some of them, but I want you to sort of keep a list or ongoing add to it as we go through some of these examples in part one. Okay, so the very first lesson, or the one that stuck out to me anyway, is chapter 4. He does speak about animals, so we learn something from about animals. Um, and it's not necessarily that they love freedom, it's that they love order, that they love strict or stable, secure routine. So that's the first thing in chapter 4. So he talks about on page 17 and 18 animals for that is what animals are, conservative, one might even say reactionary. The smallest changes can upset them. They want things to be just so day after day, month after month. So animals are predictable. They like security, safety, and pattern and purpose is how they would like to organize their existence, right? So they like a predictable routine. If you think about your own pets, they expect to be walked in the morning or again at night. They like their food at the same time every day. So that kind of is the pattern and purpose that we see in our own pets. But Pi is saying this is all animals, excuse me, all animals kind of need or desire that kind of pattern and purpose to their day. So he's saying they're very conservative, very reactionary, and they like their security and predictability of life. Okay, second one is that animals are territorial. So he says this on page 19, chapter 4 still. So animals are also territorial. They like their own space. And part of their territory is the freedom within that space to be free from predators, intruders. So it's basically their home environment and their enclosure, right? So they need to have their own territory and they'll protect that territory, often violently if somebody intrudes upon their space. So the next lesson that Pi learns about animal behavior comes from his father, and you'll remember when he has the boys watch the tiger rip apart the goat. This is a lesson that he wants his children to know that all animals are dangerous. So this is lesson number 2. It doesn't matter how small an animal is. All life will defend itself no matter what, and animals are ferocious and dangerous. So he says, even something, as long as it's not domesticated, if it's a wild animal, it's got the potential to harm you, kill you. So something even as simple as a wild guinea pig would bite you, attack you if you invaded its territory, but the dad sort of walks them through the zoo and explains how each animal is deadly and dangerous. So from a camel to an elephant to a hyena to a swan to an antelope to the tiger, right? Every animal will protect itself because life that's the life force. We'll do anything in order to survive or to live. So animals are no different in that they are ferocious, dangerous, and will protect themselves. Another animal fact or information or lesson that Pi learns. So while animals enjoy predictability, In chapter 10, he also acknowledges that all living things contain a measure of madness. So this is what he uses to explain why some animals, even if they're, in an enclosure that's perfectly suitable to them, sometimes they'll just escape. And he says this is just an instance of madness. It's part of the sort of basic nature of all animals. So there is this element of the unpredictable or unknown that is part of the animal experience, and sometimes they do inexplicable things that we can't quite fully understand. So that's part of the madness, and he does talk about animals living in sort of symbiotic relationships that you wouldn't expect. There were hippos living or rhinos living with a goat, and sometimes you could see like a kitten being taken care of by an orangutan or something like that. So he's saying there's an element of madness in these inexplicable relationships that grow between two creatures that are seemingly opposites, or even predator-prey relationships. Sometimes it just, there's an element of unpredictability to behavior. So not everything can be explained by zoological information. So another lesson or fact about animal behavior that we learn is in chapter 13. And this is where it becomes apparent to Pi that all animals respect a kind of social hierarchy or social rank. And then you can sort of understand it by the alpha animal. So we've all heard of like the alpha dog or the alpha male in a group. So that would be the sort of strongest, most dominant member of that group. So you would have an alpha lion or an alpha dog leading the pack. So that would be the one with the very dominant, strong personality who's willing to sort of fight or assert a kind of power amongst the group. And then below the alpha, you would have other sort of ranking animals within that social hierarchy. So even if you're, take for instance, if you had more than one household full of animals, like you had more than one cat in your house, there's always like one that, kind of rules the roost. That's your alpha cat. And then you would have others that are more submissive or passive, maybe one that hides in the corner, or, so you have definite personality or ranking in terms of a social hierarchy of animals. And this is something that holds true for not just our domestic cats and dogs, but for larger animals as well. So Pi uses the idea of a circus trainer, he's saying, for humans to control or be close to animals, or to control even an alpha animal. They have to become the alpha. And they have to assert that authority that an alpha animal would have in that situation. So they mark the territory as theirs. They have to sort of speak the animal language, so to speak, and then assert their dominance within that environment, like a circus trainer would to a group of lions. And then he also notes that it's the lowest kind of on the totem pole, or the hierarchy, is the animal that's most reliant on humans. So if you have the sort of runt of the litter, the passive one, that's going to be the animal that's most devoted to its human owner, because it sort of also requires the human to protect it from other animals in the group. So there is a definite social hierarchy involved in animals, and we'll see how this plays out when there's more than one animal aboard a life raft. But for now, we can just see that Pi is very much aware of that animals need and respect a strict social hierarchy. So Pi makes an interesting comparison between religion and animals in a zoo. So he's sort of creating this kind of connection or metaphor, aligning religion to almost like a zoo enclosure, And he's saying both religion and zoos have are very unpopular at the moment. And he's saying that they're not as bad as everybody is sort of, people who criticize zoo enclosures and say they're unethical and that the animals are better off in the wild. He sort of defends the relevance or the safety of a zoo and says it serves a purpose and it's actually not as bad as you think. And he's going to do the same when he defends religion. He's going to say religion also kind of has a bad rap. People think it's, uh, limits your freedoms in life. It's better to be free and unencumbered, guilt-free, do whatever you want, rather than have strict rules to live by, which is a large part of religion. So he's a defender of things that aren't quite as popular as they used to be, or he sort of defends both religion and zoos. So his defense of both, he says both religion and zoos create a kind of pattern and purpose to life. So like a zoo, so the zoo, as we talked about, is kind of an enclosure, a safe space where everything is predictable for the animals. So they have a very regimented order throughout their day. They get fed, all their food is provided to them, they have safety, but they're not free. So there's good and bad, I guess, to zoos, but he's saying our ideas of why zoos are bad are kind of not realistic. And those who say that animals are better off free in the wild, he says it's not that easy. Freedom does not make for an easy life for an animal. And he describes on page 17 what it's like for an animal in the wild. And he says, animals in the wild lead lives of compulsion and necessity within an unforgiving social hierarchy in an environment where the supply of fear is high and the supply of food low, and where territory must constantly be defended and parasites forever endured. What is the meaning of freedom in such a context? So animals in the wild have to, constantly be fearful of predators. They're not protected from that the way a zoo enclosure would protect them. Food scarce, so they have to fight for their food, and all that would be supplied for you at a zoo. So he's saying it's a lot. It's not just being free and wild and easy. He's saying there's a lot more difficulties that come with being in the wild as an animal versus a zoo. So there are some good sides to zoos in Pye's mind. Likewise, he says religion also is plagued by kind of a myth of freedom that some people say, it's better to have, free choice and all a life of opportunities and, no constraints on how you behave or moral rules to live by. There's no guilt. You can just live the life you want without rules or consequences or moral rights or wrongs, I guess. So he's saying that's also somewhat of a myth. And he's saying religion is not that bad. It's not constricting or it's like a zoo. It kind of is a supportive environment that can help make you feel more secure and safe. It's kind of this comforting environment that you can choose to live in, much like a zoo. So there's this kind of comparison between these two ideas that Pye sort of both respects and I think is a believer in the benefits of both zoos and religion. So I don't know if you agree with that, but we could maybe talk about that again when we get more into Pye's religious sensibilities. But yeah, he is a defender of religion and sees it as something that provides meaning and purpose and ritual to the routine of going through, religious rituals and creating a community and having a sort of supportive network is part of why he's drawn to spirituality and religion. So kind of like a zoo. Interesting comparison.